A small cafe, a quiet afternoon, until an angry man walks in, targeting Barron Trump. But instead of conflict, something unexpected happens, changing how people see each other. On a breezy afternoon in downtown Philadelphia, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafts from a small cafe tucked quietly on a street corner. Inside, the soft murmur of conversation blends with the clinking of cups, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. Gentle light from the window illuminates the rustic wooden tables, where patrons sip lattes, scroll through their phones, or lose themselves in private thoughts. Barron Trump, or Barron as he's known, sits at a small table near the window. His tall, lean frame is slightly hunched, his eyes intently following the lines of a thick book. He wears a simple hoodie and jeans, making no effort to draw attention. For Barron, blending into the crowd is what he desires, a rare moment of peace amidst the usual noise of daily life. Suddenly, a sharp voice cuts through the cafe's gentle hum. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" The voice is loud enough to halt every conversation in the cafe. Heads turn toward the source, a man standing just a few steps from Barron's table. He looks to be in his late 40s, his weathered, suntanned face etched with hardship, his eyes blazing with intensity. His clothes aren't shabby but worn, bearing the marks of someone who has faced many struggles. His tone is confrontational, his body tense as if ready to launch into a heated argument. He points at Barron, continuing, "You've had everything handed to you on a silver platter. Do you even know what it's like to struggle?" Barron closes his book, slowly setting it down on the table, then looks up at the man. His calm demeanor stands in stark contrast to the man's intensity. "Sir," he says, his voice steady but soft, "I'm not sure what's upsetting you, but maybe we can talk about it." The cafe falls into an eerie silence, everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what will happen next. Barron remains unflinching, his gaze steady, as if he's accustomed to such unexpected situations. He tilts his head slightly, gesturing toward the empty chair across from him, awaiting the man's response as the tension lingers in the room. Barron leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp, not leaving the man in front of him. The man's anger seemed to spread throughout the room, a heavy atmosphere that made even the customers sitting far away feel uncomfortable. Soft whispers arose from the corners of the cafe. Some people glanced over while trying to appear uninterested. The barista stood behind the counter, her hand pausing mid-action, her eyes hesitant as if weighing whether to intervene. But Barron remained unfazed. Instead of responding to the hostility with a similar attitude, he gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "Please, have a seat," he said, his tone strangely calm, like a gentle breeze easing the stifling air. The unexpected invitation made the man flinch, his tense shoulders freezing for a moment. But his anger didn't subside. He stood there, fists clenched, eyes glaring at Barron as if trying to pierce through him. The man scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Why would I want to sit with someone like you? You're just another spoiled kid who never knew what real life is like." Those words rang out sharply, like a knife cutting through the air. A few customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the whispers among them growing louder. The barista frowned slightly, her hand unconsciously resting on her phone, ready to call someone if needed. But Barron maintained an astonishing composure. He didn't react to the insult, didn't hunch his shoulders or frown. Instead, he nodded lightly, as if in agreement. "Maybe you're right," Barron admitted, his voice low and sincere. "I've never been in your shoes. But if you sit down, maybe you can tell me what that's like." In that moment, the man seemed to hesitate. The steadfastness in Barron's voice wasn't challenging. It was more like a sincere invitation, without any pretense. But the man didn't yield easily. He leaned forward, his voice lowering but still sharp as a blade. "You think I owe you my story? You think that will make you feel better about yourself?" Those sarcastic words hung in the air. Barron didn't waver. He looked straight into the man's eyes, his gaze calm but firm. "I think everyone has a story worth hearing," he said, his voice even, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. Silence enveloped the cafe. The man hesitated, his eyes scanning Barron, as if searching for a crack in that calm demeanor. The other customers continued to watch, their curiosity now mixed with a strange sense of hope. They didn't know where this conversation would lead, but no one wanted to look away. Finally, After what felt like an eternity, the man grabbed the back of the empty chair and yanked it out, the sound of wood scraping against the floor piercing the air. He dropped into the seat, crossing his arms over his chest, jaw clenched, eyes darting as if still on guard. "Fine," he muttered, his voice strained. "You want to hear about the real world? I'll tell you." The tension in the cafe eased slightly, though it didn't completely dissipate. The barista let her hand fall from the phone, returning to her work but still glancing at the two. The other customers leaned forward slightly, trying to listen to every word without showing it. Barron nodded, leaning slightly toward the man. "I'm listening," he said, his voice simple but full of sincerity. The man took a deep breath, his chest heaving as if trying to suppress something. When he began to speak, his voice was softer, but still rough like grinding stone. "You look at me and think I'm just an angry man for no reason. But you don't know what it's like to lose everything." He glanced around the cafe, his eyes daring anyone to interrupt, before turning back to Barron. "I used to have a job, a family, a decent life. But then the factory where I worked closed down. Hundreds of us were left stranded, with nothing but empty promises that they would help us find new jobs, promises that never materialized." The cafe fell silent, with only the faint hiss of the espresso machine in the distance. The man's voice began to crack, his tough exterior gradually breaking with each sentence. "I tried to hold on for my wife and kids, taking any odd job I could. But when you're struggling to survive day by day, it doesn't take long for everything to fall apart. My wife left, taking the kids, saying she couldn't take it anymore." He paused, his eyes glistening with tears. "I can't even blame her." Barron remained silent, his face showing no emotion, but the empathy in his eyes was undeniable. The man looked down at the table, his fingers unconsciously tracing the wood grain, as if searching for something to hold on to. "Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and realize everyone is looking at you, judging you, thinking you're nothing? That's my life now, every single day." Those words didn't just touch Barron, they made everyone around pause. A woman sitting nearby instinctively tightened her grip on her coffee cup, her eyes heavy with thought. "And then I see you," the man continued, his voice rising slightly, "sitting here in your nice clothes, reading a book like you don't have a care in the world. It drives me crazy, because no matter how hard I try, I'll never have what you have." His words hung in the air, heavy like a storm. Barron didn't rush to respond. He let the man's pain settle, respecting its weight. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows lightly on the table. "I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes," he said softly, "but I do know what it's like to be judged, to feel like people have decided who you are before you even open your mouth." The man looked up, his gaze sharp, eyes narrowing. What could you possibly know about that? And then, instead of responding with aggression or argument, which the man might have expected, Barron did something no one anticipated. He stood up, left his chair, and to everyone's astonishment, walked over to the barista counter. He said something to the barista, his voice so low that no one could hear. She nodded, quickly preparing 2 hot coffees, and Barron brought them back to the table, placing one in front of the man. "This is for you," Barron said, sitting back down. "Not because I want you to stop talking, but because I think sometimes a cup of coffee can help us start over." That action left the entire cafe speechless. The man stared at the coffee, his arms still crossed tightly, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. The customers around exchanged puzzled looks, some smiling faintly. The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a strange warmth. The man blinked, the hardness on his face cracking a little more. You didn't have to do that," he muttered, his voice softer, almost embarrassed. Barron shrugged, picking up his own coffee cup. "I know, but I wanted to, because I think we're not as different as you might think." The man hesitated, then slowly reached out, taking the coffee cup. He didn't drink right away, just held it tightly, as if the warmth from the cup was seeping into his cold hands. The cafe remained silent, but now the silence was no longer heavy. It carried a sense of connection, a shift that no one had expected, all starting from a small, unexpected act by Barron. "I didn't expect you to do this," the man finally spoke, his voice now gentler, almost conciliatory. "I thought you'd argue, or walk away." Barron smiled lightly, for the first time since the conversation began. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to listen. And maybe, to share a cup of coffee." The man chuckled, a dry but sincere sound. He raised the cup to his lips, took a small sip, then looked at Barron. "You're not what I thought," he admitted, and for the first time, his gaze held no hostility. Barron's unexpected action didn't just change the conversation. It changed the entire atmosphere in the room, in a way that no one, not even the man, could have predicted. The man leaned back in his chair, his hands relaxing, his eyes no longer sharp but contemplative. The cafe was quiet, all eyes on him and Barron, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice having lost its initial hostility. "You know, I came here angry at the world," he said, shaking his head slowly. "Angry at people like you, who I thought had everything handed to them. But maybe I've been carrying that anger for too long. Maybe it's not about you." Barron didn't rush to respond. He let those words hang in the air, letting them find their own weight. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and calm. "I think it's easy to blame people we don't know, but it's much harder to face what's really hurting us. You did that today, and I respect you for it." The man looked up at Barron. For the first time, his eyes held no anger, only a weariness mixed with gratitude. "You're a good kid," he said, his voice slightly hesitant, as if admitting this took effort. "I don't say that often." The change in his tone was so clear that no one could miss it. The tension in the cafe gradually dissipated, replaced by an unexpected sense of connection. The barista behind the counter smiled lightly, returning to her work. A couple sitting nearby exchanged glances, their faces softening as if a weight had been lifted. And then, the man did something that surprised everyone. He reached across the table, extending his hand to Barron. Barron hesitated for only a second before grasping it firmly. "I'm sorry," the man said, his voice low and emotional, "for judging you before I knew who you were." Barron smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. "And I'm sorry if I ever gave you a reason to feel that way." The handshake lingered for a moment before the man withdrew his hand. He stood there, awkwardly smoothing his shirt, then glanced around the cafe. "I think I owe everyone here an apology too," he said loudly, his voice echoing through the room. "I walked in here with anger, but this kid, he reminded me that sometimes we just need to listen." The cafe erupted in light applause, not loud, not showy, but heartfelt. The man nodded, clearly moved, then walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, turning back to look at Barron one last time. "Thank you," he said simply, then stepped outside. What happened next wasn't overly dramatic, but it left each person in the cafe with something to ponder, a moment to remember. As the door closed behind the man, the space seemed to exhale in relief. Conversations gradually resumed, but they were no longer the same as before. A new energy spread through the room, an unspoken understanding among strangers who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Barron returned to his seat, picked up his book, and took a sip of his now-cold tea. But before he could immerse himself back into the quiet, a woman from a nearby table approached. She was about 60 years old, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Young man," she said gently, "I just wanted to say that what you did just now was remarkable. You didn't have to listen to him, but you did. And I think you reminded all of us that sometimes kindness is all it takes to change things." Barron nodded, his expression humble. "Thank you, ma'am. I think all of us just want to be heard." The woman smiled, then returned to her table, leaving Barron with his thoughts. Around him, the cafe now buzzed with a different kind of energy. Patrons began smiling at each other, engaging in more open conversations, and showing small acts of kindness, holding the door for others, exchanging friendly glances, and even quietly paying for a stranger's bill. As Barron left the cafe, the day seemed brighter, not just for him, but for everyone who had witnessed that moment. The man's anger, Barron's empathy, and the simple act of listening had created a ripple effect of understanding and compassion. Walking down the street, Barron couldn't help but think about how small actions can have such a profound impact. He didn't know the man's full story and probably never would. But in that cafe, in that brief moment, they had connected, and that connection had changed the atmosphere of an entire room. Maybe that's all it takes sometimes, Barron thought to himself. Just a little empathy to remind us that, after all, we're not so different. This story isn't just about Barron or the man he met that day. It's about all of us, how we face challenges, how we judge others, and how we can choose to listen instead of react. If this story moved you, take a moment today to perform a small act of kindness. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's spread a little more understanding, one story at a time.